welcome to the MBA faculty workshop on course improvement. We're going to be focusing on learning objectives. So this is a joint collaboration by the MBA curriculum committee to offer some faculty development opportunities and the PCOM instructional design group. So we have Beth Shepard and Heidi Eccles here to help lead us today. We are recording right now so that we can post it later for people who could not attend this morning. I'm going to just do a brief intro about why we're having this workshop, and I'm going to turn it over to Heidi and Beth, who put together a great workshop for us. So our motivation is on the curriculum committee. We hear some feedback from students, and several of the MBA faculty have talked to students. Our MBA students are very, I'll say, savvy about syllabi and course objectives, and it's something that I'm realizing more and more is that they actually go out and they get the syllabus for the course before they sign up. They look at the course objectives and they pick their courses based on what they feel like they need to learn for their careers. And I think our average work experience on our online MBAs is over 11 years, average work experience. And so when they are coming to take a course, it's not like an undergrad who's taking a series of courses because they're told to take it. They are actually buying that course and they expect to get whatever's listed in there. And as we're collecting the syllabi, we're seeing that, we're hearing from students that sometimes the courses don't have course objectives, or we don't cover what we say we're going to cover in there. And there's been negative comments too about format and content. So we'd like to do some more standardization. We looked at the syllabi, and some courses really don't have any stated course objectives. They all had to have them initially for a course action form, but that could have been 15 years ago. And nobody looks at those course action forms once the course is approved. And you've got turnover in faculty and what you teach. And I wouldn't expect them to stay the same, but we also have sections of the same course with different course objectives. And students are very savvy about that. And they will say, this section covered this and this one didn't. And then the objectives we have written, some of them are not written in a way that's accessible. So a learning objective has to have some way for a student to demonstrate that they've met that objective. So some action verb. And I know Beth and Heidi are going to cover that. So one of the goals of our program is to standardize learning objectives across sections of the same course. So we have a truth in advertising for students. To add course objectives if there are not any overarching course objectives. So some people just have topics with learning objectives, but nothing that ties it all together. And then revise some of the objectives we have so that they're accessible. And any questions for me about why we're doing this? It's really, and several of us have gone through this process, and Elena went through it with the strategy course and made her objectives accessible and standardized across sections. We've done it with several of the other courses. And what we see is a huge reduction in any negative comments from students about the format or not covering content that we said we would cover. So there are improvements along the way. And if we standardize format, not content, but standardize format, and then across sections, standardize what we teach, not necessarily how we teach it, but what we teach, then these students who are very savvy, I think, are going to be more satisfied and happy with our program. So, all right, I will turn it over.
It's just for us to see what everybody might already be bringing to the table. And I'm going to start sharing the results with you so we can talk about this briefly. Learning objectives must be measurable. Well, bravo. We all got that correct. Good job. That's something I think that everybody does understand, and putting it into practice is what we're here to do with you today. So which learning objective is measurable? And one of the verbs that tends to be used that's not exactly specific or measurable is this understand verb. So this one is clear because we're talking about preparing something, an action verb, versus understanding is not measurable. So that's the difference there. Although it's common that we see the use of that understand verb. And what we'll talk about today and have you again practice with your own learning objectives is how can you make your learning objectives very specific and measurable for your students' success. This learning objective, anybody want to talk through why the second one is more specific and measurable? Anybody else other than me? I'll do it then. That's fine. I don't want to call.
I'm happy to do it. This is Lee.
Okay, hey Lee, thanks.
So this shows that students will be able to do something that I, as an instructor, could actually see. So I could evaluate this. It would be very hard for me to evaluate no unless I ask them to do something. And if I'm going to ask them to do something, that is the verb that I should include rather than no, because no resides inside your head. I can't see that and measure it. Outlining the relationship between supply, demand, and price, I can watch them do that or see the output of that and then evaluate them.
Great. Thank you, Lee. Exactly. And again, looking at that idea of we cannot see them learn something, but we can see them apply those principles and codes.
Can I ask you, Heidi, on that one, if you go back one? So I guess I would say apply is better than learn, but even more, you could probably even make that one more specific.
Yes. Yeah. And this one is, that's what one of the reasons I said it just about maybe measurable. This is measurable, but
right.
You could definitely make, I mean, we could probably tweak a lot of these keep tweaking. And that's sort of another thing we'll talk about is it's an iterative process where you just keep thinking and tweaking and thinking and tweaking. But yes, that one could be more specific. And so, yeah, absolutely.
So if we were to create all of our learning objectives under this type of rubric, there's not an implicit suggestion or a requirement that we would actually measure all of these measurable learning objectives, right? Because I feel like that would be too onerous to, like, I teach them a lot of stuff and then I can't actually, it's not reasonable to actually measure all the stuff I've taught them, because then that wouldn't be reasonable to expect. So it's not that I actually will measure these learning objectives, right?
Eileen or Lee?
Yeah, so the way that I was, when we did this work before, the way that we were instructed, and I think it makes sense, is you're going to teach them a lot of things, but you're not going to have a learning objective related to every single thing that they're exposed to. But the learning objectives that you have for the course should be measured somehow. So for example, students will be able to identify techniques for overcoming resistance to change. We might talk about Cotter's change model. We might talk about all the background related to change. But then when I'm going to measure that piece that I put on the syllabus that I want them to be able to do is talk about the techniques. So there's a whole lot of background. You're right, Jesse. There's a whole lot of other stuff that goes on. But my learning objectives at the end of the day, what do I want them to be able to do and show me that they're capable of doing, if that's a negotiation, if it's financial reports, if it's whatever it is. So much goes into providing that, and that can go in the description, but those learning objectives should all be measured somehow.
Yeah, it's a good question, Jesse. And what I think Lee and I found when we've gone through the Quality Matters is we probably have too many objectives, and we've had to narrow it down and say, or we have an assignment that we love to give and students like it, but it doesn't relate to anything that is a focus of the course. So we have to figure out why we're keeping that in or what we're missing. So we would really, and an assessment might just be, if it's identify or list, it could just be a multiple choice question on an exam. Can you identify? And it might just be check all the models, and that would be an assessment of that learning objective.
And to add to that, I know Eileen and Lee do this in their courses, and you probably do too, Jesse. A lot of times you might have a big project that they have to do. And a lot of times there are so many of your learning objectives that are all measured by the same project. So it's not that each one is its own assessment.
Right. Okay.
They all tie together.
That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, good point.
So that leads into the next section. Now we're going to fly through this a little bit because of course we're already behind. That's what always happens when you get people together who like each other and want to talk. So we're going to talk about a lot, but we're going to give you more resources at the end for deeper exploration because we're going to do real surface level of a bunch of things now. So the first thing we kind of want to touch on is how course design has been traditionally done versus how good instructional design principles recommend you do it. So with traditional course design, a lot of times what we do is we decide what we want to teach, and then we create all our instruction, our lectures, our assignments, and then we test that knowledge. What we recommend is called backward design, where you begin with the end in mind. So what does this mean? It's also called course mapping or course alignment. We don't have time. We're going to actually do a workshop in the fall all about course mapping. So right now we're going to do like 2 minutes talk on it. But again, we have more resources that we'll share at the end if you want to go deeper in depth. But basically, the first thing you do is figure out what is it you want your students to be able to do after they complete your course. These are going to be what you turn into learning objectives, right? What should they come out of your course being able to do or knowing? After that, you figure out, well, what's an acceptable way for them to show you they've learned this, right? Whether it's a test or a project or whatever assessment you're using to see, did they meet those learning objectives? And then the third step is that's when you finally get to the part where you say, this is what I need to teach them. This is what they need to know. These are the assignments they need to do in order to get from where they are now to where you want them to be. So thinking about that, the backward design, let's talk about content focus versus learner focus. So I said with traditional design, a lot of times we start with what do we want to teach? And we do this because it's the easiest thing, right? Especially for teaching from textbook. If you think about undergrad classes, right? It's very easy to go, I'll cover chapters 1 through 3, and then I'll test it. Then I'll cover chapters 4 through 6, and then I'll test it. But this kind of focus often results in lower level learning, which maybe that's what you want for your undergrad courses, but for your MBA level courses, we want to focus more on higher levels of learning. So instead of thinking about what do you want to teach, we think about what do we want students to learn? So again, it's thinking about what do you want them to know after the course is over? And even more than that, 2 to 3 years down the road, what do you want them to retain? What do you want the difference to be between students who have taken your course and students who have not taken your course, right? And that's what you want to think about with the backward design in your learning objectives. So a couple other quick considerations. Backward assessment versus forward assessment. So backward assessment means I taught them something and now I'm going to ask them to regurgitate it back to me, right? Forward assessment, and a lot of y'all do this already in your class, is where you say, I taught you this, now be able to apply it to a new situation, right? So I'll give you a second to look at the examples. So these are both valid ways of assessing, but again, one's more lower level learning and one's reaching higher levels. And are you assessing at the right level for your course? And the reason I point this out is because when you think of your learning objectives, is your learning objective asking for a lower level learning, or have you rewritten it so it is focused on this higher level assessment?
So we wanted to ask you to maybe think of one course. Eileen asked you to bring your syllabi, or at least to have them available maybe on your computer or device. So if you could narrow down to one course where you're thinking maybe there's an assessment that could be revised, is there something that you're doing that you think could be done a little differently or more successfully for the student. And so if you could take a minute to think of, is there an assessment piece that you have? Because what we want to do is move into learning objectives and how those learning objectives do need to connect to assessment, like Jesse brought up in the beginning. So we're going to also ask you to have a learning objective or create a learning objective. We want this to be an action-oriented workshop. So you're going to share out your learning objective with a few of your colleagues in a few minutes. So as you maybe gather those materials and think about that, I'll continue to talk about learning objectives, again, as Beth said, quickly and on a surface level. So we already jumped into some of these ideas of measuring the verbs that you use in your learning objectives. Does anybody want to take a look at this and say, well, this one is not measurable or these are measurable? Can you see the groupings of the verbs or not?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the ones on the left are not measurable. We want them to appreciate things and be familiar with things, but I can't see that.
Right. Great. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Eileen. So the verbs on the right are verbs that you would want to incorporate in your learning objectives, which again must be measurable for your course because you need to assess the learning that's happening. So describing things, comparing things, creating things like those big projects that you might have for your MBA courses are definitely verbs that you would want to include in your learning objectives. So how do you write measurable learning objectives? One of the things that we wanted to show is this idea of there are three major components. So if we think of the MBA student having a similar experience in their MBA curriculum at NC State, then the learning objectives that are written might all have these three components. Again, the context, the wording, the material will be different, but the first thing you give them is a skill, a behavior to be performed. The second thing are the conditions in which that will be performed. And the third is the criteria. So example, you might say, we need you to apply accepted principles and codes. That's the skill. The conditions are by the end of this course, we want you to be able to apply those. And then the criteria is that you apply those with 100% accuracy. So the last example is really your full learning objective and how you might break it down in thinking of those three major components to a learning objective. The next thing we wanted to talk, yes.
Oh, go back one second. I hate to interrupt.
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
So my initial thought on criteria was, of course, accuracy is always the criteria, but there are several other criteria that we could give you a list of, things like clarity or depth or breadth. So there's a list of other types of criteria other than accuracy for those of us who are quantitative who think accuracy is always the criteria. It's not the only criteria by which someone would do something.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Eileen. And we will again have that those resources compiled for you and with that will be part of it. So all of this is based in research. Everything that we're asking you to do is based in research, and two of the major ideas, the major pieces of the research are Fink's taxonomy of significant learning. And these are 6 types of significant learning. They're interactive, they're not hierarchical in this model, and they would be used selectively depending on your learning outcomes. So the key here, as you think about your graduate students, is to give them a variety of these. And also maybe the graduate students aren't so much in the foundational knowledge, but more in the integration and application of knowledge, right? But Fink's taxonomy has, as you can see, these 6 different pillars. And again, we've got in our resources a fuller description of what they are. One of the things that I appreciate about this is the caring, and that we are humans teaching humans. And so there needs to be that part of caring about the learning and caring about one another as we're in the classroom together. The other significant body of research for this is, of course, Bloom's taxonomy, which I'm sure many or most of you have heard of. And again, it separates the learning so that you can think of having a variety of these as part of your learning objectives. And this is a great slide because it gives you some verbs that are associated with the types of learning, ranging from, again, that foundation of remembering all the way up to creating, which would be a higher level of learning, and using things like design, construct, conjecture for that. So I'll give you just a quick 30 seconds to look at that. And Beth has dropped into the chat more verbs that you can find as you're thinking about your learning objectives and what really are you asking your students to understand and to learn and to be able to show you so that you can measure it. Okay.
I'm clicking everywhere. I'm clicking too fast. So in just a moment, we are going to give you a chance to work on your learning objective. So I'm going to fly through these last couple of slides before we do that to get us back in time on our timeline. But a couple of things we want to mention as you think about your learning objectives. One is, do you have things that you want your students to learn that are not textbook, right? So if you ask students to do a presentation in your course because you think it's really important they develop their presentation skills, that's really important for an MBA, so we're going to throw that in there. That should be one of your learning objectives. By spelling it out to them, remember how Eileen was talking at the beginning about, students look at that list and they complain less at the end of the course if they feel like you did what you said you were going to do. And so you actually can cut off a lot of student complaints about projects and presentations and any of those kind of soft skills if you make sure you say that's part of this course, this is part of what you're going to learn. And then the other piece that I want to point out is there are course level learning objectives and then there's unit level learning objectives. So your course level objectives are overarching goals for your course. You may find that those conditions and criteria we talked about, they're going to be looser or less well-defined at the course level. But then for each unit or topic or week, however you break down your course, you have goals for those as well. And one piece, this goes in with the course mapping, one piece when you really have time to sit down and look at your course as a whole is everything that I'm saying they need to do in this unit related to one of my course level objectives. If it's not, either that should go, or you need to rethink what are my course level objectives? Why am I teaching things that this unit doesn't tie to for my whole course? So that goes a little bit back also, Jesse, to your question of, well, are we really going to measure all of this? Sometimes the unit level ones are very minor things that get measured in a bigger project.
Can I ask just on this issue of measuring, what would be the right method of highlighting? Like, I mean, from my perspective, I thought that the reason we put these learning objectives so highlighted and salient in our Moodle course was to really draw the students' attention to, all right, what are the main things to pay attention to and what are the main outcomes or whatever. To me, as I'm looking at my learning objectives, I'm like, okay, well, that's not really measurable. I think obviously I could make it with each thing. I could just put the words be able to explain, and then whatever my current non-measurable learning objective is, it would now become a learning one. But what I mean is just general things I want them to be like, things I want to highlight, but don't actually want to or may not measure. What would be the right place for that?
To me, and I'm going to ask Lee and Eileen to contribute also, but to me, if it's something that they need to know because it's foundational to another topic, then that you don't necessarily have to spell that out as a learning objective, right? You maybe have one that says, obviously not learn, because learn's not a measurable verb, but right, you have a verb that then requires them to have learned the foundational things that you're not measuring the foundational, but if they don't know the foundational, they can't do this learning objective. But Eileen or Lee, I would love to hear your.
I mean, I guess you would have prerequisites. And one of the benefits of all the MBA faculty doing this is that you could then look at the prereqs for the course you teach and say, I know what those students should be able to do coming out of basic finance or whatever, basic econ. And so I can step forward now and do these other learning objectives. I will say in Quality Matters, they are very serious about saying, if you're not going to provide textbook materials and if you're not going to assess it, don't put it in your learning objectives.
Well, no, I agree. I guess, is there another place in your course in good practices for course delivery where you highlight students? You're basically saying, like, these are things to pay attention to because they will help you. They will help you in your actual learning objectives, or these are like not prereqs, but as like kind of like more finely grained parts of a larger learning objective that you don't necessarily want to say, like, and I guess we could just, in other words, like, let's say there's an action that if you understand that action, then you can do the larger action, which is a subset of the larger action, which is really something that would be related to the learning objective that's measured. But I'm not going to actually measure necessarily. Like, I guess I'm just confused about. It makes me feel constrained as to what I can actually tell. Like, I almost don't want to be like, all right, students, but you should pay attention to this too, but that's not a learning objective. But like, was there another word for that? Like, here, like stuff to pay attention to that you won't get measured on? Is that what's, because that cannot be the document below it?
Yeah, so think about, Jesse, it's a great question. Think about course level objectives, right? So if you think of course level objectives, those are the high level objectives. And as Eileen said earlier, lots of stuff can go under those. And in those modular level objectives, you're going to have more objectives that relate back to those. And so those can be more granular. And I think if trying to think of one of my modular level objectives, like create a team agreement. There's a lot that goes into creating a team agreement. And I tell them to pay attention to things like, what are your IAP styles and your strengths? I don't measure that at all. So my overall one of my modular objectives would be to create a team agreement as they're formulating their consulting team. There's a lot that goes under it. And I do in the way that I write it and the way that I speak about it in office hours and in my videos, I talk about paying attention to it, but I don't measure. I measure, did you create a team agreement? And I check those things off. So I don't have a specific learning objective written out for that. And that's the way I've handled that.
Gotcha. Thank you. That makes sense.
Yeah, that's a good example. And it could just be within the assignment. Remember to do here's the tips on how to complete this assignment. Yep. And that's where all the little stuff goes.
Thank you. All right, Heidi, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Okay, so we want to give you a chance to think about your learning objectives, to pick one, maybe think of, like I said, one course, one learning objective. If you have something that you want to write brand new, to take just 2 minutes to do that, or to find that learning objective that then when you go into the breakout room with 2 other colleagues, you're going to have a conversation with them. So you're going to share this learning objective and have a conversation with them about how could it be more effective, questions that you might have about your learning objective, and then any other conversations you want to have to support each other in creating effective learning objectives. So we'll give you about another minute to gather that learning objective, and then we'll open the breakout rooms. And I see that Lee has also dropped into the chat the class course map showing some levels for learning objectives that you can also take a look at. Thank you, Lee. So in your breakout rooms, I'll give you each about 5 minutes. No, I won't. I'll give you each about 3 minutes there so that you can share your objective and have a conversation. And then we'll come back together and do a wrap up.
If faculty want to set up an appointment with you or Beth or Elizabeth with instructional design and say, here's my objectives, I've worked on them, can you give me feedback? Where do they
Yeah.
send that request?
It is just an email to us, so I'll drop that in
I've
the
got it
chat.
already.
Oh, thanks, Beth.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just emailing the group.
And so we have, like I said, we have great resources in PCOM. We don't have to go to Office of Faculty Development. We've got people who understand the courses we teach and can share, oh, someone, in your group, someone else in econ is doing this, and this is kind of what they've done. So we've got some good examples that way.
I am going to go ahead and drop the link in now to our resources document from today. We'll be adding more to it, but it's already got lots of great stuff from Eileen and Lee and us. And I'll let Heidi talk.
Yeah, we'll and we're wrapping up to hopefully you found that useful to talk to your colleagues. And one idea that lots of institutions use is to have teaching cohorts where you connect with a colleague that is teaching something similar to you, or maybe the same thing, different sections. And you share information and you have conversations about what's working and what's not. And I know that takes time. Collaboration takes time, but the research shows how beneficial it is. So if you connected with someone today, keep that connection going. And like Eileen said, keep connecting. You can certainly connect with the instructional design group. And there are so many resources available that are in the chat. And there's more, there's always more. And so we just want you to reach out to us if you need anything, to think about questions that you have. And then if there's anything, Eileen or Lee, you want to share as we conclude this morning.
I do want to thank you all for attending, and hopefully you're going to walk away with some good resources. Thanks, Stephanie, in the chat. We'll have the recording. I'll send out a recording, and I'll put a link to the Google Doc that Beth just sent. I'll put that link back in the calendar invite in the notes. So if you ever can't find it, it's back in the calendar invite, and you can just remember it was in June 10th, and go back and click that link. And there's some great resources, and I do encourage you all to reach out to our instructional design. And again, the students are expecting it. And so the more we can improve our courses and put forth that very kind of, and standardized in a way that is professional, not telling you what to teach or how to teach it, but standardizing the format, making it easier on students so that the syllabi are all kind of set up the same way, and Moodle's all set up the same way. And that just takes a lot of the load off students. They're busy, they're working, a lot of them are working full time, and whatever we can do to simplify what we give them so that they can then not focus on where's the date for this or what time is it due, but they just are focusing on the content itself. You'll realize your course evals will go up, and you won't get any comments about organization or format or whatever. They'll be able to focus on the content. From their perspective, they're taking 4 or 5 courses and working full time, and everybody's got a different syllabus setup or Moodle setup. It becomes very, very difficult for students, and then they take it out on us for sure. They do. And then you get a lot of emails. So this cuts way down on all that and lets you focus right on the learning part. So,
This is such a random question, and I know it doesn't have to do with the learning objectives, but is there anybody that could take a look at content? I keep on getting comments that the workload in my class is too high. Is there anybody that, I don't know if that's true or not. I don't think it's true, but is there anybody that can take a look at it, or?
We could ask a question on evals about how many hours a week students spend, and that should give you some feedback. Maybe that's something our curriculum committee can look at adding for the MBA courses, is just to ask students, how much time did you spend on this course?
Yeah, I think it would be good, because I don't think it's true. I think they just are saying that, and I can't imagine that my course is any more challenging or they're spending any more time than anybody else. And so on any other course. So I would like to somehow get that measured, so I don't feel like an outlier all the time.
Right.
You know, Mary Ann, I had a graduate assistant that I felt very comfortable with that was in the MBA program. She had not taken my MBA class, and I asked her to review the curriculum to give me an understanding of whether there was enough, too much, or, whatever. And she did give me some pretty good feedback. So if you have a graduate assistant that has taken some courses at State, they probably, especially if they want to develop a close relationship with you, they probably will give you some good, honest feedback.
Yeah, I don't know how anybody can figure out how much my course takes unless they're in the course themselves.
Another thing you can do is ask them at the end if they're turning in any kind of weekly reports or anything, how many hours are you spending on average? Because for this class, for a 3-hour class, you should be spending 8 to 10 hours on average per week. Set some kind of standard.
Yeah, I'm always careful to tell them my classes are 1 credit hour in 5 weeks. So it's going to feel like a lot of work, but it's not 1 credit over 16 weeks. It's 1 credit over 5. So it's going to feel like a lot of time. So just reminding them that they're only working on it for 5 weeks, but it's still a whole credit hour, or 8 weeks, or whatever it happens to be. But I think maybe a curriculum committee could do maybe adding on a question on the course eval, just asking how much time they spent, and maybe do you spend more, less, or about the same on this?
Yeah, that would be great.
Just to get feedback, and it could be some courses should be heavier in content and they're not, and some maybe should be lighter.
And
don't take off.
I was going to chime in to say, I've seen some of your colleagues really effectively do this. They put throughout their entire Moodle course an estimation of how long something is going to take. A reading is going to take 20 minutes. This video lecture that I'm giving you should take you 10 minutes. This assignment, should take you an hour. And so then, Marianne, you could actually take a look and see, and it's an estimate, but look and see for yourself, how much time are you asking your students to spend?
Okay, so okay, that's a good idea, Heidi. But how much does the MBA program say that they should be spending on a 3 credit hour class in the MBA program each week?
Well, Lee, didn't you just say 8 to 10 hours?
Yeah, 8 to 10 hours.
For 3 credit
Okay.
hours.
Okay.
It's 3 hours per credit, which includes in-class time. So for
Okay.
online classes, it would include watching video lectures and readings.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
And Marianne, to Heidi's point, I did that for the first time this semester. A student actually at the beginning of the semester asked me to put estimates. And so I did that. And then I would check in, right? Because I put estimates, what I think, and I would check in with some students who would, want to talk a lot, and just to make sure, and they would say, yeah, that's exactly, you're on, or it's taking us a little longer. And then you can always modify if you're really off onto how long you think a reading should take or an assignment should take. But I did do what Heidi suggested, in that my students really did like it, because one thing that they told me is they don't go in and I'll do it at one time. So this way they can plan accordingly as to how to break out that work for an online class throughout the week. So I did find it, my students did find it helpful.
I do think it would be helpful to get messaging out to MBA students that just because a class is not a core class does not mean that automatically it should be taking less time. Because that's what I feel like. I feel like they think because my class is an elective, it should be easier and it should take less time than a core class.
And that's something we can
Messaging
do with
needs to be
messaging.
out there that they all need to be taking that 9 hours, that 8 to 10.
Well, can I ask about this hours thing? I mean, because
Sure.
if you gear a class to take 9 hours per week, obviously it's unreasonable to assume that all students are equivalent in their efficacy speed and in their learning speed and in their ability to do things. So I'm assuming what we mean by that is that the distribution, the average or some distributional measure will be 9 hours, which means that some students will take significantly longer than 9 in order for the mean or median to be 9. How can we just have people recognize reality, which is just like, hey, some people are faster than you. And sometimes, this is just how much work there is. Like I don't get it. Like how could we possibly have a class where everyone takes 9 hours? It doesn't make any sense. It literally, you can see it on the internet you can see that it takes students differential time in how long it takes them to watch a video, which you would think like, oh, well, the video's an hour, so everyone will take an hour to watch that. No, some people have to pause. It takes them a while. And that's just because people are different. And like, why can't we just accept that people are different?
I guess what I would say is I would look at the mean, right? And then give enough time. You know, if I added up all the hours it takes to do my course, give enough time for the people that take longer, just like we do with an exam. An exam, we give them an hour and 15 minutes, and some are done in half an hour. But we give enough time so that everybody, even the people that work slower, can get it done. So I would err on the side of giving more time to make sure that you accommodate kind of non-native speakers and people who just are more meticulous about doing things and slower readers.
But isn't it also
Another,
sorry, isn't it
another-
just more about setting expectations, right? So if you post an hour video and then you post like a 20-page paper to read, right? And you tell them, right, like this is 20 pages, and I would put like well, for reads, I never put time, right? But you know, you put like how long everything is. That's then up to them to figure out, okay, this is going to take me. You're not trying to gauge for every student how long it's going to take them, but you're just setting up expectations. So when they click on your course for that week, they have an idea of how long they need to spend. I don't know. That's how I look at it. Is it's not
They're taking a lot less,
but just giving them
or
to
more.
manage their course load, and they know I'm going to double speed that lecture. So it says an hour, it's going to take me 30 minutes, right? Or whatever, however they do it, they'll figure that out on their own. Maybe that.
I guess
Another-
I completely agree with that, Stephanie. I guess what I was rebelling against is the idea of if I put in my syllabus or in some kind of salient messaging that not to expect 9 hours of work,
I agree with you. I wouldn't do that.
People need to recognize that would be a statement of a distributional statement. Like, you might be the type that can do this in 4, and you might be the type that can do this in 13, and maybe you're the type that does it in 9. But to expect it literally to be 9 is not realistic, because that's not how the world is.
But if they take 20, then they should know that, hey, you said 9 and it's taking me 20. Maybe I'm not getting something.
Ada, what were you going to say?
Oh, another problem is, I mean, and Jesse, you might be in the same boat with this one as well, especially with quantitative assignments and stuff. Like, if the students are not doing the work along the way and maybe doing the practice problems, and then you assign a homework, and the homework itself would never take, let's say, more than 2 hours if they kept up with the work in the last 3 weeks. But if they're sort of learning everything from scratch to answer those 4 questions, then of course they're putting in whatever 12, 14 hours of work that they should have put in earlier. And then fortunately, they don't recognize that, regardless of how many times you mention this. And then I do get feedback along the lines of, it took me 14 hours. I'm not supposed to put in this much work. And again, I mean, there's no way that homework can take 14 hours if you kept up with the work.
Yeah. So that actually, I'm sorry.
That's
Heidi,
okay, Beth.
I'll say real quick, and then 2 things, and Ada, your point reinforces this. One is, if you don't have something already in your course that says this is how you'll be successful in my course, that is something to add. Like, this is what you need to do to be successful. Stay on top of the readings, do the practice homework assignments, whatever. If you do these, the time estimate should be accurate. If you don't do these, it's going to take you a lot longer, kind of thing. The other thing you might consider doing is a student profile. And you can post this, you can do it for yourself, but you can post it too, which is like, this is the type of student who these estimates are for, right? You come in with this knowledge already, you come in with these learning styles or this ability, you know already how to parse a textbook, you know how to take good notes, that kind of thing. You have these study skills. And if you don't have these already, this course may be a little bit harder for you until you get to this place. The flip side of that is being, helpful and compassionate. So pointing them to the resources on campus that can help them be better learners, pointing them to, if they don't have these prerequisites, where can they get up to speed on this? But explaining, like, this is who this course is written for, and this is the kind of student I'm expecting, can be helpful in setting their expectations for those timings.
That makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah, and I was just going to chime in, and then I know we need to wrap up because we're over time. that the credit hour is something that is federally set. And these are part of SACS accreditation so that it keeps faculty accountable for if you're teaching a 1 credit hour class, you can't expect a student to work 20 hours a week. And so you can look that information up as well. Like, what is the definition, the federal definition of a credit hour, and what does our accrediting body expect for a 1 semester hour course or a 3 semester hour course as well, just to give you some guidelines as you're looking at your content. Anything else?
Thank you all for sticking with us, and thank you, Heidi and Beth, for giving us some really good resources. I'll post up the link to the recording on the calendar invite, as well as the link that Beth said. And we're going to have a DEI workshop in August sometime, so I look forward to seeing you all there. Yeah. Send me any notes or feedback if you want more instructional design stuff.
Thank y'all.